Picture a congressional hearing room in late April. A cabinet official sits at the witness table with a single sheet of paper in his hand. Across from him, a sitting member of Congress is citing a figure about mercury pollution, and the official looks at that congressman and tells him, on camera, to rip the paper up and let his dog urinate on it. That official is Lee Zeldin. A few years ago, he was a Republican congressman from Long Island. He ran for governor of New York, lost, and then Donald Trump made him administrator of the Environmental Protection Agency. By the spring of 2026, he had spent a year doing one thing above all else: shrinking the agency he runs. Fewer rules, fewer staff than the EPA has had in decades, and a budget request to cut the place by more than half. So when he walked into the first of three budget hearings that week, Democrats were waiting for him. What none of them expected was that one exchange would explode into the most shared clip in environmental politics all year. 8 words, a dog, a piece of paper. But here is what almost nobody who shared that clip will show you. There is a real number buried underneath that insult, and the place it actually came from is the part that changes the whole story. If you have ever watched a viral hearing moment and assumed you got the full picture, stay with me, because this one was edited down to the studs. And to understand the line everyone clipped, you have to start with the person who set the room on fire before Harder ever got his turn. Before the dog, before the paper, there was Rosa DeLauro. She is a Democrat from Connecticut, the ranking member on the House Appropriations Committee, one of the most powerful people in that room when it comes to deciding what the government spends. And she came out swinging. She looked at Zeldin's budget and called it, in her words, a climate change denier's manifesto. Now that is a strong line. It is built to make headlines. But watch what happens when the argument actually starts. Zeldin pushes back by pointing to recent Supreme Court decisions that have scaled back how much power federal agencies have to write sweeping regulations. That is a real legal argument. The court genuinely has reined in agency authority in the last few years. And DeLauro's response to it was not another argument. It was this: I don't have to listen to this BS. That is a ranking member of the House Appropriations Committee, on the record, in a televised hearing. Zeldin's reply was almost calm. BS? You think I made up these cases? Think about what that exchange actually tells you. One side is citing court rulings by name. The other side is saying she does not have to listen. And it kept going. When the topic turned to pesticides, DeLauro held up a cup and started talking about glyphosate, the weed killer. Zeldin's response became its own moment. You're holding up a cup and saying glyphosate. Don't drink it. Don't inject it. Here is how strange that got. This is not a conservative blog describing the scene. Bloomberg Law, straight down the middle, reported that the hearing culminated in the top Democratic appropriator facetiously suggesting the agency chief drink weed killer. That is the neutral version. That is the description from the financial press. So before a single number about mercury was ever spoken, the tone of the room was set. Theater first, substance second. And a few days later, when Zeldin faced DeLauro again over in the Senate, he summed up the whole dynamic in one line. You're just somebody who likes to have the microphone on. But DeLauro was the warm-up. Because the fight that actually produced the famous clip, the one with the real number in it, did not come from her. It came from a different Democrat entirely, and it started with a word he could not back up. His name is Josh Harder. He is a Democrat from California's Central Valley. And when his turn came, he went after the EPA's decision to roll back the 2024 mercury and air toxics standards. That is a rule aimed at coal and oil-fired power plants. And Harder opened with a number that sounded devastating. He asked Zeldin, you think doubling the amount of mercury pollution in the air is going to lead to zero health harms? Doubling. That is a terrifying word. Double the mercury. And it is exactly the kind of claim that should make you stop and ask one question, the same question Zeldin asked. Where did you get doubling from? And here is the moment that should have been the headline. Harder did not clarify. He could not explain where doubling came from. Because EPA's own regulatory analysis does not say mercury would double. It says emissions would be about 23% higher in 2035 because of the repeal. 23% is a real increase. You can argue all day about whether that increase matters, but 23% is not 100%. Doubling means the number doubles. The agency's own paperwork never said that. So on that specific point, Zeldin had him. A Democratic congressman walked into a televised hearing, accused the administration of doubling mercury pollution, and when asked for the basis, had nothing. That is a part of this story that genuinely holds up. The scary headline number, doubling, was not in the data, and Zeldin pressed the advantage. He did not just stop at the question. He drew a line between where his information came from and where Harder's came from. My source is coming from career staffers, he said. Yours is coming from some mysterious people in the community. That is a brutal line in a hearing. Career staffers versus mysterious people in the community. It frames one man as the adult holding the real document and the other as someone repeating a number he heard somewhere. And in the moment, on camera, it worked. But then Harder said something else. He let go of doubling, and he reached for a second figure, a much more specific one, as much as 1,500 additional pounds of mercury. And the second that number entered the room, this stopped being a clean win and started becoming something far more complicated, because that number, the 1,500, was about to get the dog treatment. And unlike doubling, the 1,500 had a paper trail. Here is where the clip everyone shared actually lives. Harder cited that figure as much as 1,500 additional pounds of mercury from the rollback, and Zeldin came back hard. You're making up a number of 1,500 that's not accurate. I'm asking where your source is. Then came the 8 words that traveled around the internet. Zeldin looked at Harder's documentation and said, "Rip it up. Have your dog pee on it. It's just not accurate. Rip it up. Have your dog pee on it, on camera." From a cabinet secretary about a piece of paper in a Mercury hearing, you can see why it went viral. It is the kind of line that gets clipped, captioned, and shared 10 million times by people who will never watch the other 59 minutes of that hearing. And Zeldin had numbers of his own ready to go. He was reading from a sheet of paper. He said that under the old Biden rule, cumulative mercury emissions would have been 33.2 tons through the year 2037. After the repeal, the agency expected 39.3 tons over that same period. The difference works out to about 6 tons, or roughly 12,000 pounds, of mercury reductions given up across more than a decade. So now you have two numbers sitting in the same room, Zeldin's 12,000 pounds and Harder's 1,500 pounds. And here is the question almost nobody asked because the dog line was too good to look past. How can one man say 12,000 and the other say 1,500 and both be reading from EPA material? That question has an answer, and the answer is the entire story. Because 12,000 pounds is a cumulative figure. It is every pound added up across 13 years from now through 2037. And 1,500 pounds is not that at all. It is a single year figure, the worst year, the peak. Two completely different measurements. One is the whole decade stacked together. The other is one bad year standing alone. They were never the same number, and they were never supposed to be, which means the real fight was never about who made a number up. It was about which measurement you put on the screen. And that brings us to the part Zeldin's own agency really did not want hanging in the air. Because when you go looking for where Harder's 1,500 actually came from, you do not end up at some activist group. You end up somewhere far more awkward for the man holding the paper. Step back from the mercury fight for a second because it did not happen in a vacuum. This was a budget hearing, and the budget is the real story underneath all of it. The Trump administration asked Congress to cut the EPA by 52% for fiscal year 2027, more than half. That mirrors the 54.5% cut the administration wanted the year before, and Democrats did push back on that one successfully. They fought the last round down to a 3.5% cut instead of the full request. That is the backdrop for everything you just watched. Zeldin is not in those hearing rooms to defend a single mercury rule. He is there to defend cutting his own agency roughly in half after a year in which he already shrank its staff to the lowest level in decades and moved to repeal the 2009 endangerment finding, which is the legal foundation underneath most federal climate regulation. Every exchange in that room, DeLauro's manifesto line, Harder's doubling claim, the dog comment, all of it is a proxy war over one giant question. How big should the EPA be? And here is a detail that tells you this was not just blind obstruction. In the middle of all that shouting, both Democrats and Republicans actually praised Zeldin's EPA for its work regulating microplastics. The same hearing that produced the weed killer line also produced bipartisan agreement on something real. That is the part the clips never include because agreement does not go viral. So look at the pattern across the whole week. 3 hearings in 3 days. A ranking member who said she did not have to listen. A congressman who led with a number, doubling, that the data did not support. And an administrator who was sharp, prepared, quick with a comeback, and absolutely willing to humiliate a critic on camera. On the theater, Zeldin won. That is just true. He was the better performer in that room, and the clips prove it. But performance and accuracy are not the same thing. And the one place where Zeldin went past what he could actually defend, the one moment where the sharpest line in the whole hearing was aimed at a number that was real, is the thing that almost no one watching has put together yet. So when you line all of this up, there is really only one honest conclusion. And it is the conclusion the viral clip was never going to let you reach. So here it is, the number underneath the insult. When reporters checked Harder's 1,500 pounds against EPA's own estimates, they did not find a made-up figure. They found a match. According to the agency's own analysis, the repeal would lead to additional mercury emissions as high as 1,500 pounds in a single year compared to the 2024 rule. The exact number is 1,531 pounds in the year 2035. The figure Lee Zeldin told a congressman to rip up and let his dog pee on came straight out of Lee Zeldin's own EPA. Now the agency has a defense, and it is worth hearing. EPA says that 1,500-pound difference is measured against the 2024 rule, a rule that was never fully in effect, and that compared to the older 2012 standards still on the books today, there is no real increase at all. That is a fair argument about baselines. But it is a completely different argument than the one Zeldin made on camera. He did not say your number is measured against the wrong rule. He said you are making it up. And on that specific point, he was wrong. So put the four pieces together. DeLauro brought theater. Harder oversold with doubling. Zeldin won the room. And the single most quotable line of the entire hearing was aimed at a number that was sitting in his own agency's files the whole time. That is the story the clip cut out. And now you know it, which puts you ahead of nearly everyone who shared that video this week. The lesson is simple. When a hearing moment is good enough to go viral, that is exactly when you should ask what got left on the cutting room floor. The dog, the piece of paper, 8 perfect words, and underneath all of it, a number that was true. If you want the full story behind the next clip everyone is screaming about, subscribe and turn on the bell. And drop a comment, what was the moment in this one where it clicked for you?